My name is Dan Daneshvar, and I'm an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School. I'm also the chief of brain injury medicine at Spaulding Rehabilitation. My research interests include looking at the long-term effects of repetitive head impacts in athletes and military veterans. Since 1928, we've known that repeated hits to the head can cause problems later in life. Now, early on we called it punch drunk, later we called it dementia pugilistica. We now call this process Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy, or CTE. But what we didn't know is what aspects of those hits to the head were most associated with CTE pathology. And so what we've done is try to better understand that relationship by looking at football players. You see, if we were able to create a perfect experiment, what we might do is introduce repeated hits to the head in people at different ages for different lengths of time and at different intensities and frequencies. Obviously, that would be unethical to do, but football actually provides us a unique window into many of those factors. People start at different ages, they play for different career lengths, they play in different positions and different levels that are each associated with different frequencies and intensities of events. So what we were able to do is look at helmet sensor data over the last 20 years along those factors and project them onto our brain donors. And what we found is that the factors most associated with who got CTE and how severe it was the total amount of force to the head that athletes are exposed to. It wasn't symptomatic head impacts like concussions. It wasn't the total number of head impacts. And what that provides us with is an opportunity to potentially limit or mitigate athletes' risk of developing CTE. It also gives us a window into other potential sources of repetitive head impacts, like domestic violence, military service, or other contact or collision sports. Ultimately, your brain doesn't care what hits it, and so these findings from football players likely apply to other individuals as well. At this point, we can only diagnose CTE once someone passes away. What we can say, though, is based on the symptoms that people who were diagnosed with CTE post-mortem had, we can begin to surmise what the clinical picture of CTE is. What I mean is, people who passed away with CTE tended to have problems with thinking, concentration, learning, and memory, with issues with mood, including depression, anxiety, or changes in their behavior, like what we call emotional mobility, or where someone flies off the handle more quickly than usual. We can't say for sure to what extent any of these factors at this point are directly related to the CTE pathology that we find after death. But what we can say is that people with CTE tended to have these issues more frequently than others, and that more severe stage CTE tended to have more of these issues than people with less severe stage CTE. Repetitive head impacts are not only associated with CTE. We've unfortunately found that there's an increased association between people who get repeated hits to the head and ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. We found that military veterans, that football players, that soccer players, that individuals who get repeated hits to the head regardless of the source, they appear to be at increased risk of developing ALS. Now, one interesting study that we've recently done was looking at every football player who played professionally over the last 50 years. And what we found was there was a 4 times higher risk of ALS in these professional football players compared to the general population. Now, what that suggests is that these folks are at higher risk of ALS as a result of this head impact exposure. But on top of that, when we looked at NFL players who developed ALS compared them to matched NFL players who did not develop ALS. We found that those who had ALS played on average 50% longer professionally than those who did not develop ALS. What that suggests again is that repeated hits to the head are the factor that is driving this relationship between ALS and